The sky was covered in heavy clouds that morning, and the icy wind seemed to whisper secrets through the corridors of the luxurious Costa Azul airport. Inside, in a glass-enclosed room overlooking the private runway, a group of businessmen in ties watched with disdain as an old truck creaked to a stop in front of a gleaming white jet. "Is that seriously him? Is that the specialist they called?" muttered one of them, adjusting his tie with a mocking laugh. Out stepped Matthias Reb, a 39-year-old man with calloused grease-stained hands, wearing weather-worn overalls. His brown eyes bore the weight of years of struggle and injustice, yet there was a stubborn flame within them that refused to be extinguished. He opened the back of the truck and removed his old toolbox, the rusty metal creaking as if protesting. Yet another battle. In front of him, a Gulfstream G700, a jet valued at over $70 million, gleamed in the weak sunlight, surrounded by technicians incapable of solving the problem that had been dragging on for hours. From the top of the VIP lounge, Ricard Valença, the aviation company's technical director, huffed impatiently. "I asked for the best technician in the region, and they send me this mechanic from a local garage. Ridiculous." Matthias listened. He always listened, but he didn't respond. He had already learned that responding only made matters worse. Instead, he walked toward the plane with firm steps, as if carrying on his back not only his tools, but a lifetime of humiliation. At that moment, a female voice cut through the air, firm and authoritative. "Let him work." Everyone turned in surprise. Isabella Costa, the billionaire owner of the jet and CEO of Costa Aeronautica, loomed large. She wore an impeccable navy blue suit and walked with purposeful strides, her brown hair tied back in an elegant bun. Her eyes were fixed on Matthias, not on the executives around her. "How much time do you need?" she asked directly, ignoring the murmurs around her. Matthias looked up, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "It depends on the problem, ma'am. You have an hour." "Impress me," she replied, checking her watch, which probably cost more than Matthias's truck. The executives retreated to the comfort of the air conditioning, laughing and whispering, certain this would be a waste of time, but Matthias wasn't there to please them. As she opened the jet's dashboard, she took a deep breath and thought, "Maybe this is my last chance to prove myself." And there, on that cold tarmac, began a story no one would ever forget. The metallic clang of the toolbox echoed across the tarmac as Matthias knelt before the plane. His calloused fingers glided carefully over the metal plates, feeling every detail, every vibration. It was as if the jet were trying to speak to him, and he listened intently. Inside, executives and technicians continued to watch him with contempt, as if they were watching a show whose ending they already knew. To them, it was impossible that this simple man, with his grease-stained overalls and a truck falling apart, could solve the problem that highly trained teams couldn't. But outside, Isabella Costa stood firm, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed on Matthias. She didn't care what they said. There was something about this man that caught her attention. It wasn't his appearance, much less his resume. It was the way he looked at the plane. A look of someone who knew every part, every screw, every secret hidden within those gears. "Ms. Isabella, are you sure you want to give him this responsibility?" Ricardo asked, trying to sound calm, but his voice dripping with sarcasm. She didn't even look away from Matthias. "I do, and I want everyone here to step aside and let him work." The technicians backed away with disgruntled expressions, and Ricardo huffed in indignation before entering the terminal, muttering something about wasting time. Meanwhile, Matthias opened the main pressurization system panel and, within seconds, realized the error no one had noticed. His heart raced. If that plane took off at 45,000 feet, the cabin would lose pressure in minutes, and no one would survive. They would never have figured this out, he thought, as he began adjusting the parts with precise movements. His focused eyes betrayed that this was not just another task. For him, each repair was almost an act of redemption. On the other side of the glass, Isabella continued to watch. Her eyes, previously cold and calculating, were now slightly curious. It was as if she were trying to decipher who, in fact, was this man treating the plane with such care. Matthias wiped the sweat from his forehead with his forearm and, without taking his eyes off his work, spoke to himself in a low voice. "It's not just a repair. It's a lifetime of trying to fix it. Prove I'm not invisible." On Isabella's watch, 15 minutes had passed. On Ricardo's, every second seemed like an invitation for Matthias to fail. But no one there imagined that, soon, the humble mechanic would not only save the flight, but also expose a truth capable of shaking Isabella's empire and destroying everything Ricardo had built on lies, and that would be just the beginning. The sound of Matthias's tools echoed across the runway like a clock ticking against time. Each turn of the screwdriver seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of injustices, memories of closed doors, and interviews where he never went beyond "will be in touch." But there, on that runway, there was no room for the past. There was only the present, and the need to save that jet. Inside the terminal, Ricardo Valença watched impatiently through the window, drumming his fingers on the glass table. He won't be able to. It's impossible to solve this in an hour, and if he does, an assistant asked cautiously. Ricardo let out a dry laugh. Then I'll hand him the keys to the company myself. Outside, Matthias moved calmly and precisely. The diagnosis was clear. The pressurization system had suffered a catastrophic failure that previous technicians had mistaken for a simple short circuit. If this plane takes off, the cabin will lose pressure in minutes. No one will survive. He whispered to himself. That's why they didn't see it, because they never looked with their hearts, only with numbers. Matthias's hands moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Each piece was carefully adjusted, each connection checked as if it were the last. He knew he couldn't make a mistake. Not this time. Through the glass, Isabella continued to watch. Her gaze was no longer the same as before. There was no disdain, no coldness. There was something different, something deeper. It was as if she were seeing a side of the world that had always been hidden from him. In 30 minutes, Matthias finished the repair. He closed the panel firmly, wiped his hands on an old rag, and let out a long sigh. The job was done, another life saved, or maybe several. When he stood, Isabella walked toward him. Her heels clicked on the runway, echoing like a warning to the curious onlookers watching from afar. She stopped a few steps away, the wind slightly ruffling her impeccable bun. They would never have found the real problem, she said bluntly. No, and the plane would have crashed, Matthew replied, without looking away. For a moment, the silence between them seemed to freeze the world around them. There was a tension in the air, as if something much bigger was about to happen. From the terminal, Ricardo watched with a mixture of irritation and unease. Why is Isabella talking to him? It doesn't make sense. Come with me, Isabella said, her tone undeniable. Matthias frowned in confusion but followed. Each step he took behind her seemed to bring him closer to a truth he could never have imagined until then. And little did Matthias know that that moment so simple and silent was the beginning of a revolution that would forever change his life and shake the foundations of an empire built on lies. Isabella's footsteps echoed through the luxurious corridors of the private terminal as Matthias followed her in silence. The scent of polished wood and expensive leather filled the air, contrasting with the faint odor of polish impregnated on his overalls. With each step, the mechanic felt his heart pounding. He didn't understand why she wanted to speak to him alone, but there was something in the billionaire's firm tone that prevented him from refusing. They entered a spacious room with a huge glass table in the center and a panoramic view of the runway where the jet was parked. Isabella closed the door behind her and pointed to a chair. Sit down. Matthias hesitated, then obeyed. He felt out of place in that environment so far removed from the world he knew, but maintained his posture. Isabella sat across from him, resting her elbows on the table, her penetrating gaze fixed on his. What's your full name? She asked, typing rapidly on her tablet. Mateus Ribeiro, Mom. There was a brief silence, interrupted only by the sound of notifications on the tablet. Then, her eyes widened slightly. Matthias Ribeiro. Mister, it can't be. Matthias frowned, confused. What is it? Isabella slid the tablet toward him, displaying a technical project with the Costa Aeronautica logo in the bottom corner. The initials MR were engraved next to an innovative pressurization system. This is the system you fixed out there, and those are your initials, aren't they? Matthias felt a lump in his throat. They are, but that was years ago. I worked here, until I was fired. Fired? Why? He took a deep breath, fighting back the pain of the memories. They said I was incompetent. 3 days after I presented this project. Isabella gritted her teeth, her eyes shining with indignation. And do you know who got the credit? I know, he replied bitterly. He caught Valence. The silence between them was broken by a sharp knock on the door. Before Isabella could respond, Ricardo entered uninvited, his expression filled with false concern. Isabella, the board is waiting for you. And what is that mechanic still doing here? His job is already finished. Isabella didn't take her eyes off Ricardo. Her voice was as cold as ice. We're discussing intellectual property, Ricardo, something that might interest you. The technical director paled, but tried to hide it with a nervous laugh. That's absurd. That man was just an assistant. Isabella didn't answer. She simply opened a folder on the table and revealed documents that would explode the truth like a bomb in that empire built on lies. Matthias remained silent, but inside he felt something ignite. For the first time in years, he was close to seeing justice served, and this was only the beginning of a giant's fall. The silence in the room was almost suffocating. The sound of the clock on the wall seemed amplified, ticking away each second like a hammer pounding on Ricardo's conscience. Across the table, Isabella held her gaze steady, and Matthias remained seated, his hands clasped tightly on his knees, trying to remain calm. Explain this to me, Ricardo, Isabella said coldly, sliding the documents across the shiny glass of the table. Ricardo took the papers with trembling hands. His eyes flickered over the lines, and a red spot rose on his neck. This is a misunderstanding. This system was developed by my team. This man was just an assistant. Matthias took a deep breath, feeling an old anger bubbling in his chest. But he said nothing. He had learned, throughout life, that silence often speaks louder than 1,000 words. Isabella, however, had no patience for games. Auxiliary, are you sure? She asked, her tone filled with a menacing calm. Of course. Interesting. she interrupted, sliding another document across the table. Here's an email from you sent to HR, recommending Matthias's dismissal for technical incompetence. Date 3 days after he presented the system. Design you signed as your own. Ricardo's face paled as paper. ISABELA. This is a serious accusation. Are you going to take a mechanic's word over a director's? It's not a matter of belief, she replied, her eyes flashing. It's a matter of facts, and I have them all. Ricardo opened his mouth to retort, but Isabella stood and walked around the table, facing him. Now, you will leave this room. You are suspended until further notice. The board will be informed immediately. You can't do this. The board will never allow it. Ricardo exploded, his face contorting in fury. The board will be informed within the hour, Isabella said, pointing to the door. If you want to maintain any dignity, leave on your own before I call security. Ricardo hesitated, his chest heaving. Finally, he turned and left, slamming the door shut. The sound reverberated through the room like the echo of an empire, beginning to crumble. Isabella turned to Matthias, who was looking at her with a mixture of surprise and caution. Mr. Ribeiro, what happened out there was more than just a plain repair. You saved lives, but here, she pointed to the documents, you are about to save an entire company. And what do you want from me? Matthias asked, his voice low. I want you to help me tear down the system of lies that sustains men like Ricardo, and in return I want to give you back what was always yours: recognition, compensation, and perhaps something even greater. Matthias narrowed his eyes, intrigued. What could be greater than that? Isabella gave a slight smile. The future, Matthias. A future where men like you no longer need to prove their worth. He felt the weight of those words. For the first time in years, a flame of hope lit in his chest. But outside that room, Ricardo wasn't about to go down without a fight. The room seemed quieter after Ricardo's explosive exit. Matthias remained seated, trying to process everything that was happening. He felt his heart pounding, as if each beat were a reminder of all the doors that had closed unfairly throughout his life. Across the table, Isabella settled back into a chair, but this time her gaze seemed different. It wasn't just that of a cold, calculating CEO. There was a gleam of determination, and perhaps even respect. Matthias, I investigated every detail about the system, the pressurization system you created, the patents, the reports, everything points back to you. But I need to understand, why did a man with your talent end up in a neighborhood auto repair shop? Matthias took a deep breath. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with himself, deciding whether to open his heart. Then he spoke, because no one hires a black engineer from the outskirts of the city to lead development teams. They prefer someone like Ricardo, an expensive suit, an influential surname, and the right skin color. The words came out with a mixture of pain and coldness, and Isabella felt a slight tightening in her chest. It wasn't surprising to hear it, but hearing it from someone she was beginning to admire made all the difference. And yet you came back here, even knowing you would be humiliated, she said. I didn't come back for them. I came back for the plane, for those passengers who don't even know they could have died. There was a heavy silence in the room. Then Isabella slid a folder toward Mate. Here are internal documents showing how Ricardo not only stole credit for your work, but did the same with 3 other engineers over the years. They were all fired shortly after presenting valuable innovations. Do you see the pattern? Mattis felt his stomach churn. And why are you showing me this? Because I want to put an end to this once and for all. But for that, I need you. Matthias raised his eyebrows suspiciously. Why me? You could hire any lawyer, any technical consultant. Isabella leaned forward, her voice almost a whisper. Because you know the system better than anyone. Because you know how they operate. And because you're the only one who has something Ricardo will never have, the truth. Matthias remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table. Inside, a battle raged between anger, pain, and a spark of hope he had long tried to extinguish. Before he could respond, a loud knock on the door interrupted the moment. Ricardo entered again, this time with a more tense expression, carrying a bulky briefcase. Isabella, I demand a meeting with the council now, and I want this man out of here. He's already done his job. But what Ricardo didn't know was that, at that very moment, his fate had already begun to be written by the hands of the one he had underestimated for years. The door to the room slammed shut as Ricardo entered, his heavy breathing betraying the nervousness he tried to hide behind a fake smile. In his hands was a bulky briefcase, which he held like a shield. Isabella, the council is waiting. We need to discuss urgent matters. And as for that mechanic, he shot Matthias a venomous look. His job is already done. There's no reason for him to stay here. Isabella remained seated, her legs crossed, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. There was something in her gaze that made Ricardo hesitate for a second. Ricardo, we were just discussing a topic that might interest you greatly, and what would that be? He asked, trying to sound calm, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Isabella picked up the tablet on the table and slid the screen to a technical project. She turned the device toward him and pointed to the initials in the bottom corner. Mister, do you recognize this? Ricardo swallowed hard but quickly forced a laugh. Oh, sure. This project is mine. It was developed by my team years ago. That mechanic was just an assistant. Matthias, who had remained silent until then, looked up and spoke firmly. I wasn't an assistant, Ricardo. I was the engineer who created this system. You just put your name on my work and then threw me out on the street, like trash. The room fell silent. The air seemed thicker, almost palpable. Ricardo stepped forward, his face flushing with anger. That's a lie. This man is trying to take advantage of you, Isabella. He wants to tarnish my name because he failed to stand out. Isabella stood slowly, her posture imposing. A lie. Then explain this to me. She opened a folder and spread several documents on the table. Emails, technical reports, and even a dismissal recommendation signed by Ricardo, dated 3 days after Matthias had presented the project. Ricardo's face paled. That was a misunderstanding, or a well-planned robbery, Isabella said, crossing her arms. And now, Ricardo, you are suspended from your duties. Security will escort you out. You can't do this. The board will remove you for this affront, Ricardo shouted, his voice almost cracking. The board will be informed within the hour, Isabella replied firmly. And if you want to maintain any dignity, I suggest you leave right now. Ricardo hesitated, fists clenched, before slamming his briefcase on the table and leaving, huffing angrily. The sound of the door closing reverberated like thunder, signaling the beginning of the fall of an empire. Isabella turned to Matthias, her eyes less cold now, but filled with determination. Now we can talk about the next step. Are you ready to put an end to this rotten system once and for all? Matthias took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that decision. I was born ready, ma'am. And in that instant an unlikely alliance was formed, destined to forever change the future of Costa Aeronautica. The room was plunged into an almost reverent silence after Ricardo's departure. Matthias felt his heart racing, but not out of fear. It was as if every cell in his body knew that this moment was the beginning of something greater. Isabella sat back down, her expression serious, but her eyes carrying a spark of admiration that had not been there before. She pulled out an elegant black folder and opened it before him. What you did out there today wasn't just repairing an airplane, Matthias. You saved lives. And more than that, You proved to me that you've always been ahead of men like Ricardo. Matthias leaned forward suspiciously. And what exactly do you want from me now? Isabella took a deep breath. I want you to help me overturn an entire system of corruption and injustice within the Brazilian Air Force. A system that not only erased your name from history, but also that of other talented engineers. Matthias kept his gaze fixed on her. And if I say no, then Ricardo and others like him will remain in charge, stealing ideas, destroying careers, and benefiting from talents like yours. But if you say yes, she slid a contract across the table. You will have official recognition as the creator of the system, retroactive financial compensation for royalties, and a proposal. Matthias frowned. What kind of proposal? The position of Director of Innovation, the position that should have been yours from the start. Matthias let out a short, almost bitter laugh. Do you really think the board will accept a man like me in that position? A mechanic from the outskirts? They will never allow it. Isabella gave a cold, determined smile. They won't have a choice, because when I show them the evidence I have, and with your help, there will be no way they can deny it. For a moment, Matthias was silent. He remembered the lonely night in the lab, the moment he created the system that was now the pride of the company, and the day he was thrown out like a criminal. Before he could respond, the door to the room burst open. It was Dr. Helena Vasquez, head of the legal department, with an even bulkier folder in her hands. Forgive me for the delay, Isabella. I needed to confirm a few things in the intellectual property records. She glanced at Matthias and then back at Isabella. And yes, everything matches. The original files have Matthias Ribeiro's digital signature. Matthias felt a shiver run down his spine. For the first time, the truth was coming to light. Isabella turned to him. So, Matheus, are you ready to make history? He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and when he opened them, there was a different flame there, not of anger, but of resolve. Let's end this once and for all. The boardroom was crowded. Men and women in expensive suits chatted in hushed tones, casting curious glances at the projector screen waiting to be turned on. In the center of the oval table, Ricardo Valença stood rigidly, with a forced smile and his hands clasped, as if trying to hide his nervousness. In a discreet corner of the room, Matthias watched silently. He was dressed in a simple dress shirt and a borrowed blazer, but his posture was firm. Beside him, Isabella typed on her tablet, her eyes blazing with determination. The board chairman cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. Let's begin. Ricardo, you requested this extraordinary meeting. What's the urgency? Ricardo stood, straightening his tie. Gentlemen, I am here to alert you to an attempt to defame me and the good name of this company. A former employee, dismissed for incompetence, is claiming to be the true creator of our pressurization system. A murmur ran through the room. Ricardo smiled, believing he had control of the narrative. But before he could continue, Isabella calmly stood up and connected her tablet to the projector. Within seconds, a set of files appeared on the screen. Technical plans, digital records, emails, and contracts. In the bottom right corner of each document, the initials MR shone like an open wound. In fact, gentlemen, what we have here is a fraud that has been going on for years, Isabella said, her voice sharp as a blade. The true creator of the system is Matias Ribeiro, and Ricardo appropriated his work to gain promotions and million-dollar bonuses. Ricardo turned pale. That's absurd. He was just an assistant. An assistant, Isabella countered, sliding to the next file. Here's the email in which he recommended Matias's dismissal for technical incompetence, exactly 3 days after he presented the complete system design. The murmur in the room grew louder. Counselors exchanged uncomfortable glances. And then, Isabella played the last file, a recorded audio. Ricardo's voice echoed through the room's speakers. We need to eliminate any trace of this mechanic's authorship. Who would believe that a black man from the outskirts created such a sophisticated system? We sign it as if it were mine and close the matter. The silence that followed was deafening. Ricardo's face turned red, then gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The board chairman slammed the table. He called the Valenza. You are suspended immediately. There will be a full investigation, and if the accusations are confirmed, your actions will be revoked. Isabella turned to Matias with a slight smile. It's time for you to take the place that has always been yours. Matias took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt justice was finally being served, but he knew there was still more to be done. 6 months had passed since that historic day at the Costa Aeronautica boardroom. The headquarters building, once cold and dominated by indifferent executives, now breathed a different energy. Young talent roamed the halls. Diverse teams occupied leadership positions. And, atop it all, Matias Ribeiro's name was emblazoned as the new director of innovation. That morning, Matias walked the halls with a firm stride, wearing an elegant suit that contrasted with the worn overalls he'd worn the day it all began. But despite his changed appearance, his eyes still held the humility of someone who had never forgotten where he came from. Beside him, Isabella walked with a smile. I told you they wouldn't have a choice. You did, Matias replied with a slight smile, but it still feels like a dream to me. They entered a room where young apprentices were working on new technology projects. Matias looked around and saw faces of different colors, genders, and backgrounds, all united by the same gleam in their eyes. Hope. These here, said Isabella, pointing to the young people, are the future of engineering in our country. And you are a living example that talent knows no color or address. Across the room, an elderly gray-haired woman watched, with teary eyes. It was Donna Maria, Matias's mother, who had spent her life cleaning luxurious buildings so her son could study. She said nothing. She just smiled proudly as tears streamed down her face. Matias approached her and held her hands. Tenderly, Mom, all this is yours too. Outside the building, journalists jostled for space to capture the moment. Costa Aeronautica was now a benchmark not only for technology, but also for justice and inclusion. And at the center of this transformation was the man who had once been seen as nothing more than a mechanic. That same day, during an interview with an international magazine, Matias was asked, if you could go back in time, would you change anything? He smiled thoughtfully. No, because it was all the closed doors that taught me to build my own entrance. Today I know that true success isn't about proving anything to others. It's about paving the way so that no one else has to go through what I went through. The camera captured him looking out at the horizon, the sun reflecting off the windows of the building that now bore his mark. And so, the story of a scorned mechanic became the legend of a man who dared to challenge an unfair system. And